Hi, I'm Paul J. Welcome back to theAnalysis-news. This is part 2 of my conversation with Adolph Reed, who's an academic, an author, an activist, an organizer. And as I said in part 1, has been critiquing the Democratic Party and, of course, the capitalist system and trying to offer solutions for decades. Probably better to watch part 1 and then pick up with us at part 2, whatever. Thanks for joining me again, I know.
Always happy to do it, Paul. Love our conversations.
So Adolph Reed is an activist, an organizer, an academic, an author. Thanks for joining us, Adolph.
Well, hi, Paul. Thanks for having me, man. It's always great to talk.
So let's talk about this moment. And a lot of this moment is the politics around the genocide in Gaza. And the role of the Biden administration it's been quite profound in how it's affected campus politics at the very least. There's an actual student movement again. I don't think we've seen one like this, I guess, since Occupy or maybe the Iraq War, but this has real movement to it. And much of the campus movement and the broader sections of society, it's not just about Gaza. It is going further and looking at some of the systemic issues. But it is coming at a time with these critical elections coming. I think one of the things that's missing in the critique or understanding of why the Biden administration is so loyal to the Israeli state and only recently trying to distance itself a little bit from what's going on in Gaza. I mean, the images on television and even the American media is actually showing more of this than one might have thought. Even you can see, even among some of the mainstream journalists, they're completely taken aback by the scale of the devastation in Gaza. And just for the sake of it, let me say, for people who might not have heard me on this point, I do think what Hamas did on October 7th was a terrorist attack. That part of the attack that was against civilians, at any rate, part of it was against military, which is not a terrorist attack. But the part that was against civilians was a terrorist attack. It seems some of it was pretty atrocious. I think some of the reports had likely been exaggerated. There's reports in the Israeli press that some of it's been, what happened on the 7th was exaggerated. And I am no fan of Hamas. I have no problem critiquing Hamas at this moment. Some people on the left don't want to say anything against Hamas, but Hamas is the creation of the Israeli apartheid state. It wouldn't have existed without it. That's another conversation. But I think the thing that's maybe missing from understanding why the Biden administration has taken, up until very recently, such a strong stand in support of a government that hates them. Netanyahu's far closer to the Republicans than the Democrats anyway. But continuing to ship all these weapons and so on, is that the extent to which Israel is baked in to Cold War psychology of the American elites and political elites. Like, let's not forget, 1948, when Israel was founded, is one of the most critical years in the construction of the Cold War narrative, that there's an existential threat where, U.S. has to defend freedom and democracy and all of this. And Israel is at the core, not in the beginning, but it wasn't long before Israel became part of that core argument that these are the things that defend Western democracy and Israel is the thing that defends it in the Middle East. I mean, it's all hypocrisy, but it's very baked in, and I think we shouldn't underestimate how much people like Biden actually believe this stuff.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think that's right about Biden, right? I mean, like he said, he's called himself a Zionist proudly.
Yeah, and may well be a Christian Zionist.
Oh, yeah, could be. I mean, he's I was just trying to think of how or what kind of inroads that's made into Catholicism. I don't think a lot, but
Oh no, it has. Oh yeah,
has
like Steve Bannon and that whole crowd.
oh right, of course.
They're all connected to Opus Dei, and
Right.
they're all into Christian Zionism now. That's far right
lovely.
section. Like J.D. Vance is a very interesting phenomenon. J.D. Vance
Yeah.
was this new rising maniac on the right.
Yeah, right.
Converted to Catholicism just a few years ago.
Oh, did he?
Yes, and there's
Yeah.
several others in this far right camp that have moved,
Yeah,
from various other Christian denominations.
yeah. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
something going on in this far Catholic right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's pretty dangerous. I know that. I mean, and there was a similar movement among the right in the early 20th century, which is kind of interesting, but maybe a little more in Europe than in or in England than in the U.S. But anyway, yeah. I mean, so he's and of course Biden, being Biden, sort of probably imbibed his Zionist or his Zionism, laced with that AIPAC money, right? So that's the other factor here,
That their ideology is always linked to money.
right? Oh no, totally. So, but yeah, there's that. But also, their connection, or I mean, the centrist Democrats' connection to that strain of neoconservative foreign policy that they've been connected to for a long time anyway, kind of sets them up to be to see the kind of what Mauro the Marini described in the late 60s as a sub-imperialist role that Israel plays in the Middle East. And by the way, the Israelis, I mean the Zionists, the aggressive tendencies within Zionism played on that, right? Going back to the 20s, I mean, played on selling themselves to the Brits and then to the U.S. as European fundamentally and guardians of Western civilization, right, in that part of the world.
I may be wrong about this because I didn't follow it closely, but I see Israel was in the European music song competition.
Oh wow, really?
What the hell? What's Israel doing there?
Yeah. Well, I guess for the same reason that Gabe Pressman used to give the daily report from Tel Aviv right every day in the summer. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's been, to me, it's been kind of interesting watching how the right and the ultra right across the board have glommed onto support of Israel, right, as a basis for jacking up the higher ed sector, right? Trustees at places like Penn and Harvard and elsewhere, who for whom ultimately the game was never really just about defense of Israel. It's also about visions that they have for what the university ought to be like, right? But it's an easy, and like this is happening around some other issues too. But like going at it, it's a vehicle for going after public libraries, going after K-12 education, going after DEI, and I mean denouncing woke this and the other, and sort of expanding the idea of what counts as terrorism, right? So it's useful in domestic politics. In the same way we were talking before episode 1 about how Cold War anti-communism was more useful for pursuing agendas in domestic politics than it was like international politics. So it's also kind of interesting to watch those elements of the right take what seemed to be like pages from the identitarian left's playbook, but to turn them back against us too. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, like Yeah, I forget where you are on the war in Ukraine. I mean, but I've been opposed to it from the very beginning, and 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 frankly, I don't see how if you can think just as far back as 2014, right? I mean, how you could see it not like in any other way, but especially if you go back to the 90s, there's no justification for expanding NATO eastward except a militarist one. And if that's the case, then that sort of risks the nuclear war. I mean, that's where the greatest risk now in the world is, followed by by the Middle East. I mean, I thought I read someplace not that long ago about how the Biden administration had back channel talks going with Iran to work out a satisfactory response from the Iranians to the Israelis having attacked the Iranian embassy in Syria. And then they were having back channel discussions with the Israelis to try to keep their response to the Iranians' response damped out as much as possible. But in both cases, like, it's easy to see this getting out of hand.
Well, just quickly on Ukraine, this is a fight over spheres of influence.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And I think the primary mission of NATO has always been to defend the American sphere of influence in Europe. There was never a threat of a Soviet invasion of Western Europe.
Right.
And I would have said prior to the invasion of Ukraine, there was no real threat of that either, but I was wrong, because clearly there was and is.
Well, yeah, Biden almost made him.
I don't think the Russians invaded because of NATO expansion. As much as I'm against, I'm against NATO. Period. I would like to see no NATO.
Right.
But I think this is Russians fighting for their sphere of influence, Ukraine, like Ukraine and the Western sphere of influence, and that is not a justification for war. But what do we need now? Obviously, is a ceasefire, a resolution, and workers. Ukrainian workers and Russian workers should stop killing each other.
Right. Yep.
I don't think Ukrainian workers should be dying so that the Ukrainian oligarchy can regain some territory.
Yep.
And what I'm about to say is probably not possible. What I would love to see is all these armed Ukrainians tell the Russians, get the hell out, but come to some accommodation, and then turn your guns on the Ukrainian oligarchy, actually get rid of them, and then tell the Russians, and then hold proper referendums, find out what the people actually want.
Yeah.
Ukraine and Crimea.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Bottom line is the war has to.
But also
Gaza stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want to say that Gaza is an example, like in Michigan. I think it's great when people voted uncontested or unconfirmed.
Yeah.
Or the term was
uncommitted.
Uncommitted.
Yeah, I did that here too.
Yeah, and to do that, everywhere possible is the right thing to do. I think to put maximum pressure on the Biden administration is the right thing to do.
Right.
But it's also, I think, important that you can still say vote for the Democrats and viciously critique their policy.
Right. No, absolutely.
It's not contradictory.
Yeah.
Also, if you can tell people the whole picture.
Right. That's right.
Why vote? Like I think I wrote an article last time. Trump versus Biden. Vote for Biden without illusions.
Right. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that's the thing. We got to do. Don't repeat any Democratic Party speaking points.
No, totally.
Mostly BS.
Right.
And two, they don't convince anybody who isn't already in that camp.
No, I agree. Well, in 2016, I did the same thing for Hillary. And in fact, I wrote a column called Vote for the Lying Neoliberal Warmonger. It's important. But yeah, I agree. And you got to, we have to try to cultivate.
Although I got to say, Hillary is even worse.
Oh, no. Yeah,
Not worse than Trump. Well, I don't even know worse than Trump. Hillary's so bad on foreign policy.
Right. Oh, no, I know. It's terrible. Terrible. Yeah. I mean, that was a tougher one to me than Biden was, frankly.
Let me just say one thing, just to add one thing.
Sure.
People shouldn't underestimate, even though there may not be drastic differences on foreign policy between a Biden and a Trump. There are some significant ones.
Right.
But maybe not so drastic, except I think the Trump administration would be even more hawkish and provocative with China. But domestically, there are some real differences domestically. It shouldn't be underestimated.
Well, no, true. And I mean, well, one of the things about this is that, those the left punditocracy, right, are basically people who imagine, rightly or wrongly, that a Trump administration wouldn't change their lives all that much. And that's important to keep in mind too, because it would, right? I mean, or it's likely to, like for most of them, even. It certainly would for all the rest of us. But yeah, and I mean, as far as Gaza is concerned, I mean, you mentioned this. Like the Republicans have said, they tell us every day what they would do, and it's finish the genocide.
Use a nuclear bomb.
Right. Oh yeah. Which there's probably had Kushner freaking out because.
Well, Lindsey Graham actually said that. He said we
I know.
Justified in using a nuclear bomb in Japan. Why wouldn't Israelis be justified in doing what they're doing at the very least?
Well, partly because you wouldn't be able to develop the beachfront property in Gaza if you did that. But yeah, no, right. So I mean, they'd be worse on that front too. And I mean, look, the world's such a mess at this point. I mean, like I've been struck at how NATO has swallowed the EU, basically, which is a big victory for the U.S. And God knows what's going to happen in Germany. The AfD is they're making hay now because Schultz and the governments are horrible. So I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I would say still, look. What's happening in Gaza is like almost unspeakably horrible, and the fact that we can't do anything to affect it, or it doesn't seem like we can do anything to affect it, or at least it doesn't seem like we can do anything to affect it before the Netanyahu government has succeeded in cleansing both Gaza and the West Bank, which has been the program for a long time, right? And it's kind of, it's naive, right, to imagine that that's not the case. And at this point, I think it's counterproductive not to say it out loud, like for fear it might fragment the peace coalition, because what peace coalition is there? Right? There's any power anyway. So I don't know. I mean, it's a bleak time, like and even that feels kind of like a sort of self-satisfied Weltschmerz, right, from somebody whose everyday position is comparatively safe, at least until the Republicans come in. But all around us, right? I mean, the signs of breakdown and decay are all around us. It's like 30 years of Democrats bullshit, 40 years, if not longer, telling us that with respect to domestic politics and public services and public goods, we can do more with less because we're smarter now, which has always been a lie. And that's why we've got physical infrastructure that's rotting all over the country. I mean, here in Philly, a few years ago, we had a serious water main break. It seemed like every 3 weeks, and like the local news would treat each one like it was a one-off, right? But since I retired, I spent a lot of time down in New Orleans too, and like same thing there. The infrastructure is horrible and rotting, and people and and elites just think that it's enough to tell us, well, we don't have the money to do anything about it, right? Well, I mean, one of the most telling moments in global politics for me was when the markets locked up, like in the Great Recession, and the ECB and the Fed and other central bankers decided to bail out the financial sector without to do anything for the rest of us. And there were, I mean, you remember, there were massive demonstrations, 1 million or more people in the street in every major capital in Europe, and big demonstrations here, had absolutely no effect on anything. And in one case after another, the central banker or the prime minister or a finance minister would make public statements in a very soft monotone, and basically say, well, to the hell with you, like, we're going to do what we've been doing anyway. And that was a telling moment, right? I mean, that just showed the extent to which all of our movements have been hollowed out from underneath. And we gotta, what is you saying? Not just go back to the door knocking, but like door knocking to have political conversations, right? What about issues that affect their lives?
And I want to take back something I said, which there may not be that much difference on foreign policy. It may even be on Ukraine for their own nefarious reasons. A Trump administration might actually push a resolution of the Ukraine thing. But I have a feeling, once elected and not feeling that he would be charged with being weak on Russia, my guess is Biden's going to push a resolution of Ukraine if he has a new administration pretty soon.
Yeah.
They can't sustain.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think so too. Right.
But there's another big difference where I think it's better for the world if the Democrats are empowered than the Trump Republicans, which is, I don't think, given being in the belly of the beast of the U.S. empire, there's only so much possible.
Right.
At times of crisis, they have the ability, they being the American elites, just to throw money at people like they did in the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
They just
beautiful example.
Give people some purchasing power. They did it after 9/11. They did it big time during the pandemic.
Right.
The organizing has to take place, but to think there's going to be some massive breakthrough in the short term nationally, there might be in some states or some cities, and that's not insignificant.
No.
But given this is the empire, but the thing is this: we need breakthrough somewhere, and it's more likely to be in Latin America.
Right.
Maybe in Africa.
Yeah.
But which party in power is better in that respect? And as far as I can see, the Democrats are a little more benign, a little more restrained when it comes to Latin America, especially. Like we're back to getting some left governments elected in certain places.
Yep.
If Trump's elected, they'll do everything they can to bring Bolsonaro back to power in Brazil.
Oh yeah. Well, and plus they're embedded with the whole Operation Condor crew. I think you froze on me.
You likely could see whether it's Bolsonaro or another type of crazy Christian nationalist.
Oh yeah. Yep. Well,
there will be an attempt to bring Christian nationalists to Latin America.
No, that's right. That's exactly right. Yep. No, I mean, I agree with you about that, and it's quite important. I mean, I was saying, like, the Trump forces are in bed with both the actual and the legatees of the Operation Condor crew, like from the 70s and 80s. I mean, they're in bed with the worst of the right. So, no, I agree.
And I'd say the other place which I have a hope for, there's a kind of revolutionary movement at some point, and people won't expect this one, I suppose, is China.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But as long as the West, the U.S., maintains all this hawkish bullshit over Taiwan,
right? I know.
You're not going to see that in China because the nationalists that can get promoted in those circumstances.
Right.
Of course, that's exactly what the military-industrial complex wants. The more nationalist China there is, the more justification there is for spending money.
Yep. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Hell of a moment we're in, man.
Yeah, a very complex moment. And, I hope we humans find a way. All right. Thanks very much for joining me.
Oh, hey, Paul. Thanks for having me, brother. Let's do it again before too long.
Yeah, for sure. Pretty soon. All right. Thank you for joining us on theAnalysis.news. And I'm going to start something soon if you and the audience are interested. We're getting lots of comments and questions on YouTube and on all the other platforms. And we'll try to answer some of the questions and comments people are making. So thanks again for joining us on theAnalysis.news.